The Season 10 stun meta has been quite frustrating for many tank players, but oddly enough, I hear a lot of people say that Reinhardt is really bad this meta. He actually is the best tank, although he might be really frustrating to play and very difficult. This video is going to aim at the specific problems that Season 10 is presenting for Reinhardt players, and we're going to break down some of the fundamentals of taking these engagements, the different interactions that you come across with some of the best heroes right now, to hopefully level up your Rein game, or to make sure that your Rein teammate isn't making some of these big mistakes that lose team fights. Reinhardt is incredibly strong, and a huge percentage of the team's success rests on his shoulders. Both teams are running Deathballs right now most of the time. 3 supports, a Reinhardt, Zarya, and any half-decent Hanzo worth his salt is going to win a lot of games. I think you'll find that if the enemy isn't running this, you're just going to win. So, first things first, I think a lot of Rein players get confused at the poke stage of the fight. And we're going to cover all aspects of this, but we're going to start at something that is a little bit more basic. As the enemy Deathball starts to take space on you, there's a few things you want to think about with your Fire Strike. Making sure to try to hit as many targets as possible is nice in order to win at the Earth Shatter charge race, but even more importantly is finding squishies, and when you can help it multiple as well. Reason being, Fire Strike goes through barriers. The enemy Brigitte has a barrier that makes her immune to most sources of damage, and getting something weak with a Fire Strike is one of the best ways for your fellow DPS players, Zarya spam, and everybody else to be able to follow up on a kill meaningfully. There's a lot of healing and sustain in the game right now, but actively trying to target the squishies in the Deathball with your Fire Strike can help pressure them down and have them make difficult decisions on who they're supposed to heal. Really, only Moira can heal multiple things at once really efficiently, so any other healer combination is going to struggle when multiple squishies get weak from a single Fire Strike. But sometimes the enemy is a little bit harder to hit. You have to make decisions on who you toss the Fire Strike at. If I have the option to choose, I almost always try to hit the Brigitte, because when her shield's up, she's a lot slower and easy to hit, and I know she's the one character that a lot of Rein players have trouble against, but honestly, you're as much of a threat to her as she is to you. The few things that you want to think about when playing up against the Brigitte is making sure that if you get stunned, you're in a safe location. I start to realize that I'm losing this poke battle against the enemy Rein, and start to peel back into the cafe, luring the aggression towards me and allowing my support to come through for me, and we're able to flip this fight on its head. Part of outsmarting Brigitte as Reinhardt is really luring her in to the abilities you have that go through her barrier, your hammer and your Fire Strike. If you're able to land 2 of those in a row, she's really susceptible to either being full out mouse one-ed by you or cleaned up by a teammate. There's a lot of Brigitte players that are going for really uncoordinated, irrelevant stuns on you. So as the Rein player, know that as long as you get to where you're favored to fight, and we'll break that down a little bit more in a minute, but you won't be too afraid of the enemy stunning you unless they're hitting you with multiple abilities at once, which of course, synergizing with your own Brigitte in order to do that, counting down to be able to land Earth Shatter right after a stun can be really effective, obviously, but overall the Brigitte just on her own doesn't really do anything. It's the stun that sets up for her teammates to do stuff that you have to worry about, and in fact, if you see her aggressing towards you without the support to help, you can kind of focus on putting some of your hits into hitting her, and it'll force her to back away. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about shaping the battlefield in order to push towards getting the space you want. This is probably the biggest issue I see with Rein players outside of the highest ranks, is that they're not forcing and bullying their way towards getting a good fight. When we were on the attack on Volskaya, I tried to force them into fighting into a back corner. But on the reverse side, as the enemy takes the same exact positioning, I don't want to let them out of this choke. And even though our Pharah teammate goes down, we're able to control this engagement and set up for a really reliable pin that really, if I hit anything, as long as it's not a Zarya bubble, is going to switch this team fight right on its head. Out in the distance, my DPS is losing the battle against the Hanzo, but because we control the frontline battle so much, we win convincingly, and that's something you want to think about. We'll show some counter examples here in a minute, but first let's show the enemy tanks failing to do this against me and how perilous it can become. Here in Nepal, we're actually playing up against a 6-stack, believe it or not, but we have triple support with a Lucio, and they're attempting to run dive. Their tanks come in and fight out of sync, no go. We control the engagement and hit shots, they're forced to back away. Now on their next re-engage, a great example to remind you that Lucio is definitely a pick you're going to want when you're playing Reinhardt, because look how impossible it is for this enemy Reinhardt to take space on me. His entire team requires many seconds to march up this main street. We control the entire engagement both times they attempt to come in like this, they swap over to the Brigida on the second fight, but I am able to lure them into a fairly reliable pin. Unfortunately, it does send me across the map, but because we have the high ground and they don't, and they especially don't have speed, they can't capitalize on anything going on. They can't turn quickly to go chase after me out of position to go focus me, and they ultimately still on the low ground while we have the high ground shooting down on them. We win this fight convincingly and the round. And this is what makes Lucio so important oftentimes, that if the enemy Reinhardt is forcing you into these really claustrophobic fights where you're always fighting in a disadvantaged position, you're really going to want to swap to that speed boost almost regardless of what you have, even if it requires you to have less healing, because no amount of good healing wins an engagement that is set up poorly. Now, the reason why a lot of people still think Lucio's bad is because they still take bad engagements and then try to out-heal it with Lucio and say they don't have enough heals, but the actual solution was to speed into a good engagement and utilize the fact that you have a big blue barrier that blocks 2,000 damage. You don't need to get healed if you avoid it while you're setting up. Now, if this whole taking good engagement section was a bit confusing, I think it'll make a bit more sense when you see it in the inverse. When I make mistakes on Reinhardt, it becomes really clear. And we want to explain what are the things that you have to think about when taking these engagements. Note, most of the time, it's perfectly fine to be trying to trade hammer damage and fire strikes as you poke, walk back, regen your shield. A lot of the time, until you find those guaranteed pin spots, that's all you need to do. And there's usually a recurring theme when Reinhardt pins what the problem was. Either it pins him into a spot where he's going to be out of position, and even if he gets the kill, he's going to die anyway, and not having your shield to be able to regen to continue the brawl and the fight usually loses it. Or it was like this pin right here, where even though we had a man advantage, and in your head you might think, oh, it's go time to clean up, well, they still have most of their team alive. Remember, this exact thing happened to me when I was the Reinhardt. My DPS got picked, but the frontline battle went so well, we won it anyway. That same thing is happening here, and it's because the enemy has a big funnel on me. And even if I have my entire team behind me, I'm going to take a guess and say I don't really know. I can't see them, right? We have to operate with the information we do have, and that is the enemy has a complete line of sight for all of them to attack me. And that's exactly what happens. I dropped my shield, and I got hit by the storm arrow, the stun, the fire strike, all at once. And the way that you forego allowing this type of thing to happen to you is to make sure that you're not forcing the engagement when multiple of the enemy can hit you with their damage and their cooldowns especially. You kind of have to track, do they have bubbles? When Hanzo's lit up like a Christmas tree, he's using Storm Arrow. Track the Brigida's stun. And if you're starting to add up all these different things that could potentially hit you, that means it's not a good time to go in. Make a similar mistake here on Volskaya. Don't know what I was thinking with this pin. Really bad angle. Even if I hit it, it's going to send him way off into the corner. Much better if I can get it to land into the side wall so I stay tighter to my team. But it's in these cases where you decide, okay, it's go time, without really thinking about the different sources of damage and cooldowns that can hit you in the face. You need your team to be active in the fight for you to stand a chance. Here, I get a pretty mediocre shatter, try to follow up on it myself, but my team's slow, or especially when you don't have a Lucio. You don't always need one, obviously, but if you don't have one, you definitely can't go for these more aggro deep plays, because none of my team could have followed up with me there. They're too far behind me, and we could have just kept luring them into that close range choke and been fine. Unfortunately, a lot of times when you're playing Ryan like this, you might even do the right thing and get focused down anyway, but it's almost always a lot better to try to duck away, to get behind something, to heal up and regen your shield, rather than making the decision for the opponent really easy and focus you when you're pinning, because when you pin in too deep, it's almost like Pharah hitting the barrage button. You're instantly going to die, because especially if they think they're going to be pinned, they're going to all try to shoot you to save their teammates or themselves. You can get focused down really easily. We've got another example of this, making sure we're trying to get our teammates in position. Notice that the majority of the Deathball is down here on the ground, and I'm funneling myself into a close range engagement. All the damage is hitting my face. Pretty poor decision. Not to mention, there's a Hanzo on the high ground that's utterly wrecking us. Remember, as you turn this corner and you can see all of the enemy able to see you, it made it very easy for the enemy to focus me down in front before my team could even get into space. Much better for me to duck away while my team start to spread out to the right side so they all can get angles kills on the enemy Reinhardt, rather than trying to force the issue here, get my shield and face broken, not sustaining myself or commanding space at all. And then, once you are able to sustain in a good brawl, then the poke battle starts to ensue. And you're playing in this Zarya Rein Brigida mirror match, your goal is to avoid hitting the enemy's Zarya bubbles, but trying to hit as many hammer swings and fire strikes that you can, while dodging as many from the enemy. And as the tanks start to brawl back and forth with this, hopefully your Zarya gets more charge, and your Reinhardt gets more charge on his Earth Shatter, and or just simply connect more damage on the enemy Rein, gain a health advantage, and are able to W-mouse 1 to victory once you have that. Now, the last section that I want to cover is really important as well, and it's all about ult fights, which is a big percentage of team fights in Overwatch right now, since it's so hard to kill anything without big wombo combos. There's a few things we want to cover. First and foremost, always track the enemy Reinhardt's shatter. One of the best counterplays that a Rein can do when his whole team gets gravitoned is shatter out of it, which might trade back a few kills, and if the grav didn't get the whole team, give them a hope in order to win the fight. So with that being the case, still watch the Reinhardt's animations and look to see if he's about to drop the hammer, and you might have to animation cancel your Rein swing in order to drop your shield in time to save your team from getting shattered, especially as you're approaching up to the graviton. In fact, a lot of times I might just start to press up towards them with the shield blocked just to deny the shatter outright, if I think he has it. But let's face it, with so much brawling going on, it's pretty easy for a Rein to almost get a shatter a fight. And I advise that you try to be a bit aggressive with your Earth Shatters in this meta, because it's one of the best ways that you can get some ultimate economy going in your favor. What I mean by that is, if you're able to win a fight with just Earth Shatter, or even get the Zarya down and dead so she doesn't keep her charge, you eventually will get more gravitons than they will. And also there's another principle. As defenders, you would much rather the enemy attempt to use a graviton early in Streets phase rather than later in Streets phase, because if they do it when the card's moved up too far, well, you're not going to get a retake. Whereas playing a bit more aggressive onto the starting sections and chokes of a Streets phase, you can force them to use ults to win that fight, which means they won't have their free win buttons when it comes to the really important fights coming up. And even if you just use Shatter to sort of tip the scales in early fights, you charge it so fast that you might have it again in order to win out in those more crucial fights later. There's a lot of tactics that you can use to try to land Shatters. Winning the shield break war is a obvious one. Remember that if the damage from the Earth Shatter breaks the enemy Rein shield, then it cracks and it will go through his team. If the enemy Reinhardt tries to force his way onto you too much, hitting you with his hammer, you actually can step through him and get the Shatter to land behind him, hitting his team. Of course, Speed Boost helps you do this a little bit easier, because as he steps forward, it's hard for him to gain the momentum quick enough to fall back and block it. A bit more of a complicated thing, though, is trying to decide if it's worth it to shatter, especially when you're in a graviton, because right now, Dragon Strike almost can't be stopped because there's a lot more economical follow-up than there is defense. What I mean by that is they can use damage amp on the Hanzo to blast through it. Even if your team uses support ultimates, then you start to think, well, do we need 2 support ultimates to stay alive? There's a lot of wonky interactions with how that's going to pan out, and usually overall, I would say don't even use support ultimates in a grav right now, because it is just so easy to add the extra oomph to take you over the top to burst through them, and you never want to use a support ultimate and lose a fight. Realistically, it's almost better to wait and see if the Reinhardt gets a money shatter out of the grav, but that's a pretty narrow play as well. And your thought process on whether to pull the trigger when in a grav should be quite similar to all the other rules of engagement that we talked about. What's the likelihood that the enemy is set up to overwhelm you? Do they have better angles on you? How many of your team is stuck in the grav? If there's too many, you might not even be able to see the enemy clear enough for you to be able to follow up on the shatter. It can be fairly difficult to call, but since it charges much faster than support ults, I think it's the safer risk when you're caught in it to see what you can get with the shatter first for it to be kind of your go-to response. Because it's a lot easier to waste shatter, come back with a support ult that you can just W-mouse 1, win a brawl anyway, and charge it up again, rather than hoping and praying that the support ult will save you. Well, that's everything I have for today's video. I hope this helped level up your Rein game. Of course, we have a lot of other Rein guides on the channel as well. This one was geared specifically for things that are going on with Season 10. You can check out our other videos on especially things like shield management, really important, didn't discuss that today, as well as many other things to do with playing the big German brawling badass. But if you enjoyed this video, video and you found it useful, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe because we upload each and every day, so you're going to want to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.